The alarm on my console screamed before I even had my boots on. Red light washed over the bridge of the kinship's end, and I remember thinking, in that first half-second, that we had made a mistake coming here at all. My name is Ethan Blake, and I was the weapons officer on the first human ship to ever meet the wider galaxy face to face. I had trained for years to sit in that chair. Nothing had trained me for what came next. We had dropped out of slipspace only 6 hours earlier, sliding into orbit above a trade station, so large it blotted out the stars behind it. The station belonged to something called the Overcouncil, a group of species who had been trading, talking, and quietly ruling this part of the galaxy for longer than humans had been building cities. When our ship appeared on their sensors, the entire station lit up with activity. Ships of every shape turned to look at us the way a crowd turns to look at a stranger who has wandered into the wrong room. Captain Laura Bennett stood at the center of the bridge, arms folded, watching the view screen fill with alien vessels. She did not look afraid. She looked like a woman doing long division in her head, working out exactly how much room we had to breathe. "They're hailing us," said Grace Turner, our communications officer, her fingers already moving across her console. "Multiple channels. They want visual." "Give them visual," Bennett said. "Let's be polite. We're the new kids." I remember laughing quietly at that, because it was true. To them, we were new. To us, they were the first proof that we were not alone in the universe. And that fact alone made my hands unsteady on the weapons console, even though there was nothing yet to aim at. The screen flickered and resolved into the face of an alien delegate, if face is even the right word. His skin was pale blue, smooth as glass, and his eyes sat wide apart like a bird's. Behind him stretched a room full of others like him, watching us the way you might watch an animal that had wandered too far from its enclosure. "Human vessel," the delegate said, in a voice our translators smoothed into something like standard English, though the rhythm still felt foreign. "You have entered protected space. Identify your intentions." Bennett stepped forward. "We are the kinship's end, representing the united peoples of Earth. We come in peace, seeking contact and understanding. We mean no harm to anyone here." There was a pause. The delegate's wide eyes blinked, slow and unreadable. Somewhere behind him, I heard something that might have been laughter, quickly hidden. "One ship," he said. "You send one ship to meet 100 worlds." "We didn't know how many worlds we'd find," Bennett answered, calm as still water. "We wanted our first meeting to be small, personal, a conversation, not a show of force." I watched the delegate's expression shift, though I could not read it fully. To him, I think, our single ship looked less like restraint and more like weakness, like a species too poor, too fragile, or too unimportant to send more than a token vessel to its own first contact. He did not know what that one ship carried inside it. None of them did. They invited us aboard the station for what they called a meeting of threshold, a ceremony held whenever a new species first entered galactic society. Bennett accepted. I was assigned to the small landing party, along with Grace Turner, our science officer Daniel Ross, and 2 Marines, Oliver Grant and Sophie Hart, who stood at the edges of every room we entered like they were carved from stone. The station's interior stole the breath right out of my chest. Corridors stretched upward in curves that seemed to defy the shape of the ship itself, lit by soft golden light with no visible source. Alien beings of a dozen different kinds moved past us, some with too many limbs, some with none at all, gliding on fields of shimmering light. I had spent my whole life on a single blue planet, and here I was, walking among the proof that the universe was far stranger and far larger than anything in our history books. But strangeness alone did not scare me. What scared me, slowly, quietly, was the way they looked at us. Not with fear, not even with real curiosity. With something closer to amusement. We were led into a great circular chamber, where the Overcouncil sat in a ring of high seats, each one representing a different member species. At the center of the ring stood a raised platform, and it was there that Bennett stood to speak for humanity, with the rest of us a few steps behind her. The delegate who had first spoken to us, whose name I later learned was Vorin, rose from his seat. "Humanity," he said, letting the word sit in the air like he was testing its weight. "A young species. Records show your kind achieved spaceflight only a handful of centuries ago. You have not yet unified fully as one people, and you still carry old wounds among yourselves. Yet here you stand, asking to join a community older than your written history. We're asking to learn, Bennett said. Not to be handed anything. We know we're new. We know we have a lot to understand about how things work out here. Another delegate spoke, a tall being wrapped in shifting patterns of color that I think served as some form of expression. Your species has not experienced true conflict in living memory, according to our observations. Is that correct? I felt the air in the room shift, though I could not have explained why at the time. Bennett's jaw tightened, just slightly, before she answered. We have experienced conflict, she said carefully. We choose not to lead with it. Voron's eyes narrowed, amused rather than suspicious. How curious. Most young species lead with exactly that. It is usually the first thing they wish us to know, so that we understand what they are capable of.
We'd rather you understand what we hope for,
Bennett said. Not what we're capable of. The chamber went quiet for a moment, and I could feel the weight of 100 unreadable gazes settling on us. It was not hostility, not yet. It was something closer to a room full of people, deciding whether the newcomer at the party was interesting or merely small. Then Voron smiled, or did something with his face that our minds translated into a smile, and the tension in the room eased into something lighter, almost playful. Then let us welcome you properly, he said. Tonight, you will be our guests. Tomorrow, we begin the formal proceedings of your threshold. There is much to discuss. Trade routes, territory, the boundaries of what is and is not yours to claim. I remember feeling something like relief as we were led out of the chamber, back into those golden corridors, toward whatever passed for a guest hall on a station built by 100 different species. Grace Turner leaned close to me as we walked. They think we're small, she whispered. Did you feel that? I felt it, I said. Does it bother you? I thought about it for a moment, watching Oliver Grant's shoulders, tense and alert, even in a room meant for hospitality. No, I said. Let them think what they want. We didn't come here to prove anything. I believed that when I said it. I did not know, standing in that golden hallway, how quickly that would change, or how soon the galaxy would learn exactly what kind of species had walked so quietly into their meeting room. Before we returned to our quarters, the Overcouncil hosted what they called a welcoming gathering, held in a wide hall with a ceiling open to the stars through some kind of transparent shielding. Alien guests drifted between tables, of food none of us dared touch, exchanging polite questions about Earth that felt more like curiosity about a strange pet than genuine interest in a new neighbor. A delegate with skin like brushed silver approached me while I stood near the edge of the hall, watching Daniel Ross try and fail to explain gravity wells to a small crowd of amused listeners.
You are the weapons officer,
the silver delegate said, tilting her head. Her voice carried a musical lilt through the translator. Tell me, what does a species so young need with weapons at all? We assumed you brought your ship simply to speak. Every ship that travels far from home carries some means of defense, I said. It's not about starting anything. It's about being able to come home again if something goes wrong. How practical, she said, though the word sounded almost like an insult in her mouth. We have not needed such defenses in a very long time. Conflict among our peoples ended in negotiation, centuries ago. We settled disagreements with words, with treaties, with careful patience. It is what allowed us to become what we are. That sounds like something worth learning from, I said, and I meant it. She studied me for a long moment, her pale eyes catching the light strangely. Perhaps, though I wonder sometimes if a peace built on forgetting is truly peace at all, or simply distance from memory. I did not understand what she meant by that. Not then. I only nodded politely and excused myself, drifting back toward Grace Turner, who was deep in conversation with a small, many-legged being that kept adjusting some kind of translation device strapped to its underside. They keep asking if we have any wars going on right now, Grace murmured to me, once the creature had scuttled off toward another group. Like they're waiting for us to admit something. Maybe they are, I said. You think they know something we don't? I think, I said slowly, watching Voron across the hall, laughing at something one of his colleagues had said, that they've decided who we are before we've had a chance to show them. and I don't think we're going to like what happens when that picture doesn't match reality." Grace didn't answer right away. She just watched the room with me, the golden light catching on faces from a dozen worlds, all of them so certain of their place in the order of things that none of them thought to wonder what quiet, careful people might be capable of, if they were ever truly pushed. Sophie Hart found us not long after, her posture as rigid as ever even in a room built for celebration. "Captain wants everyone back at quarters within the hour," she said quietly. "She doesn't like how this is going." "Neither do I admitted. We said our farewells to hosts who smiled with unfamiliar mouths and wished us well in voices smoothed by translation software, and we walked back through those golden corridors one final time that night, past windows that showed a galaxy far bigger than anything I had imagined, as a boy staring up at the sky from my backyard. Bennett was waiting for us in the small common area of our guest quarters, standing with her hands behind her back, looking out at the stars through the wide window. "They think we're harmless," she said, without turning around. I could see it in every one of their faces today, polite, curious, condescending, in the gentlest possible way. "Does it matter what they think?" Oliver Grant asked, arms folded near the doorway. "It matters," Bennett said, "because a species that underestimates you will make mistakes around you, careless mistakes. And out here, far from home, mistakes can cost lives." I did not know yet how right she was, or how soon we would learn it. That night, in the small guest quarters they gave us aboard the station, I lay awake longer than I should have. Through a wide window curved along the outer wall, I could see human stars, or at least stars close enough to our own that they felt familiar, scattered among constellations I did not recognize. Somewhere beyond that glass, our colonies were scattered across a handful of systems, small and quiet, tending their own quiet lives, trusting that the ship sent ahead of them was doing its job. I thought about home. I thought about my sister, who worked on one of those colonies, sending me letters full of small complaints about soil samples and greenhouse temperatures, utterly unaware that her brother was standing inside a room built by beings who had never known real hardship, and who had just decided, without quite saying so, that humanity was not worth taking seriously. I did not know yet that somewhere among those quiet stars, one of our colonies was about to become the reason for everything that followed. I closed my eyes eventually, and sleep came, thin and uneasy, filled with the golden light of that alien hallway, and the sound of Voron's voice repeating the same word over and over in my dreams. Small, small, small. I woke to the sound of my own name being called through the intercom, urgent and clipped, Bennett's voice cutting through the last fog of sleep. "Ethan!" "Bridge, now." I was moving before I had even finished thinking. Something in her voice told me the golden hallways and polite smiles were already behind us, and whatever waited ahead would not be nearly so gentle. I hit the bridge at a run, my uniform still half fastened, and found Bennett standing over the tactical display, with a look on her face I had not seen since our final training exercises back home, the ones where everything was designed to go wrong at once. "Report," I said, sliding into my station. "Over-council forces are moving," Bennett said. "A strike group left the station 40 minutes ago. No warning to us. No explanation. We're moving. Daniel's been tracking their course since it changed." Daniel Ross looked up from his console, his face pale under the blue glow of the screen. "They're heading toward the edge of the system, toward a set of coordinates that matches an old survey marker in our database. I flagged it because the marker's designation looked familiar, and then I checked it twice because I didn't want to be right." "Right about what?" I asked, though some part of me already knew I would not like the answer. "It's a human designation," Daniel said. "Sector marker 741. That's not an empty rock out there, Ethan. That's Haldis Colony." The bridge went very quiet. Haldis was a small settlement, barely 4,000 people, mostly farmers and researchers, who had chosen a quiet corner of space to build something simple and slow. It was not a military outpost. It was not even armed beyond basic planetary defense. It was the kind of place that existed because humanity had finally learned, after everything, that some worlds should just be left to grow in peace. Sophie Hart appeared at the bridge entrance, still fastening the last strap of her uniform. Oliver Grant a step behind her. Neither of them spoke. They simply took up position near the back of the bridge, watching the display with the same stillness I had seen in them during every drill we had ever run together. The stillness of people trained to wait for orders rather than panic. "How sure are we about the identification?" Bennett asked. "Certain," Daniel said. "I cross-referenced it against 3 separate registries. Haldus was founded 11 years ago, agricultural colony, mostly grain and protein cultivation, a research annex studying soil adaptation for future settlements. There's no military presence there at all. There was never supposed to need to be. Casualties if this proceeds?" Bennett asked, though I could hear in her voice that she already dreaded the answer. "Depends on yield and targeting radius," Daniel said. "If it's anything like the demonstration weapons I've seen referenced in their technical exchanges so far, we could be looking at most of the colony's population, depending on how close to the settlement center they're aiming." I felt my stomach tighten. 4,000 people. Farmers, researchers, children born on a world their parents had chosen specifically because it promised them a quiet, unremarkable life. "Hail them," Bennett said. "The strike group, not the colony. Now." Grace Turner's hands moved fast across her console. Channel open. Voran's face appeared on the screen, calm, almost bored, standing now in what looked like a command chair aboard one of the departing vessels. "Kinship's End. This is an internal over-council matter. There is no cause for concern." "Those coordinates belong to a human settlement," Bennett said, her voice steady, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Explain your intentions immediately." Voran tilted his head, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been surprise cross his strange features. "Our survey listed that location as an abandoned outpost, unclaimed and unmonitored. It was selected for a demonstration exercise, meant to illustrate to your delegation the discipline of our forces during tomorrow's proceedings. A show of precision, nothing more." "It is not abandoned," Bennett said. "There are 4,000 people living there right now." For a moment, Voran said nothing at all, and in that silence, I felt something in my chest go cold and still. "Our survey data may be outdated," he admitted finally. "I will confirm with the strike commander." "Confirm faster," Bennett snapped. "Recall them, now." Voran's image flickered as he turned away to speak with someone off-screen, his voice dropping too low for the translator to catch clearly. When he faced us again, his composure had cracked just slightly at the edges, though he tried to hide it. "The strike group has already begun its approach," he said. "Recall procedures require confirmation through several channels. It will take time." "How much time?" I asked. 12 minutes, he said. "Perhaps less." I looked at the tactical display, at the small blinking marker representing Haldus Colony. So far from us, that even at our best speed, we could never reach it in time. 12 minutes might as well have been 12 years. All we could do was watch, and listen, and hope that somewhere in that gap between mistake and consequence, someone on their side would move fast enough to matter. "Open a channel to the colony," Bennett said quietly. "Direct." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she worked, but her voice stayed level. "Channel open, Captain. They're receiving." A voice crackled through the speakers, young, uncertain, clearly not trained for anything like this. "This is Haldus Colony Control. Please identify. We're reading unusual ship movement near the outer markers. Is anyone able to explain what's happening out there?" Bennett leaned toward the comm. "Haldus Colony. This is Captain Laura Bennett, of the human vessel Kinship's End. I need you to begin emergency shelter procedures immediately. Do you understand me? Immediately." "Ma'am, we don't have military shelters. We're a farming colony. Our deepest structures are grain silos, and the old mining tunnels from before the settlement was." "Use whatever you have," Bennett said. "Get people underground. Get them away from open ground. Do it now, and keep this channel live."
I do not know how to describe what it feels like to sit in a chair on a ship, surrounded by screens and numbers, and listen to a colony wake up to the worst morning of its existence.
I heard alarms in the background of that transmission, distant at first, then closer. I heard the young voice on the other end, trying to stay calm while giving orders to people who had never trained for anything like this. I heard, somewhere behind him, a child asking what was happening, and an adult telling her it was just a drill. "Please, just come with me. Quickly now." 10 minutes, Daniel said quietly, watching the strike group's approach vector update on his display. Voran's voice returned, tight with something I might have called worry if I had trusted myself to read alien expressions correctly by then. Kinship's End. I want to assure you, the strike group commander has confirmed the exercise parameters are limited in scope. Minimal impact is expected. This will be resolved with an official apology and appropriate compensation. You are talking about compensation for a colony full of people who have not done anything wrong, I said, before I could stop myself. There is no compensation for that. Voren did not answer. Bennett turned to me, and for just a moment, I saw something in her face I had never seen before. Not fear exactly, but the look of someone doing the math and not liking any of the answers. Ethan, she said, ready our long-range systems. If there is any way to intercept, I want it ready the second it becomes possible. Captain, at this range, even our fastest response would arrive after. I know, she said. Ready them anyway. I worked in silence after that, my hands moving through procedures I had trained for 100 times, but never expected to use in a moment like this. All while the open channel to Haldis kept playing in the background, a colony waking up, gathering its children, running toward tunnels dug for storing grain, not for surviving anything at all. 5 minutes, Daniel said. On the comm, the young voice from Haldis Control had grown steadier, focused entirely on the task in front of him. Shelter procedures underway. We've got most of the northern settlement moving toward the old tunnels. Southern farms are still evacuating. We've got maybe 600 people still above ground and moving as fast as they can. Tell them to keep moving, Bennett said. Tell them help is coming. I do not know if she believed that when she said it. I think she said it because someone needed to hear it, and because hope, even thin and unlikely, was the only thing we had left to offer across that impossible distance. Voren appeared on screen again, and this time his composure had slipped entirely. Kinship's End. I have ordered the strike commander to abort. He acknowledges the order, but states the weapons platform has already entered its firing sequence, and cannot be halted mid-cycle without risking uncontrolled detonation closer to the surface. He is attempting to redirect the strike to an unpopulated section of the terrain. Attempting, Bennett repeated. It is the safest option available, Voren said. I watched the countdown on Daniel's display tick past 2 minutes, then 1, and I found myself gripping the edge of my console so tightly, my knuckles ached. On the open channel, the young voice from Haldis had stopped speaking entirely, replaced by the sound of running footsteps, distant shouting, and beneath it all, terribly clear, the sound of a mother somewhere nearby singing quietly to a child, the kind of song meant to make fear feel smaller than it was. I closed my eyes for just a moment, and I thought about my sister, on a colony not so different from this one, and I understood, for the first time, exactly how far away we truly were from home, and how little that distance had ever mattered before this exact moment. 30 seconds, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Grant broke the silence first, his voice low and rough. Captain, permission to speak freely. Bennett did not look away from the display. Granted. If this happens, he said, the people responsible need to understand exactly what they've done, not tomorrow, in some careful diplomatic meeting. Now, while it's still real to them. Bennett said nothing, but I saw her jaw tighten, and I understood that she was already thinking the same thing, turning it over in her mind the way she turned over every decision before she made it, weighing consequences that stretched far beyond this single moment. On the open channel, the singing had stopped. There was only the sound of breathing now, quick and frightened, and somewhere beneath it, the low hum of tunnel systems, never designed to shelter anyone from anything worse than a bad harvest season. 15 seconds, Daniel said. Voren's voice returned one final time, stripped of all its earlier calm. Kinship's End. I want you to know, this was never meant to... Save it, Bennett said quietly. Save it for after. Nobody on the bridge spoke after that. There was nothing left to say, and nowhere near enough time to say it in. The channel did not go silent all at once. It went silent in pieces, the way a room empties out during a fire drill that turns out to be real, voices dropping away one by one, until only static remained, thin and endless, filling the bridge like a held breath that never got released. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Daniel Ross stared at his display, his hands frozen above the console, as if pulling them back might somehow change what had already happened on a world hundreds of light years away. "Confirm status," Bennett said, and her voice, for the first time since I had known her, cracked slightly in the middle of the sentence. Daniel swallowed hard before he answered. "Strike impact confirmed. Northern Settlement District. The tunnel network held for the most part, but the surface installations are gone. I'm reading heavy structural loss across the agricultural zone." He paused, his eyes still fixed on the numbers scrolling past him. 600 and change were still above ground when it happened. I don't have confirmed numbers past that yet. I sat very still in my chair, staring at the small blinking marker on the tactical display, the one that had represented Haldis Colony only minutes ago, and now represented something else entirely, something I did not yet have the right words for. Grace Turner had not moved from her console either, her headset still on, her hand resting near the comm controls as though she could not quite bring herself to close the channel, even though there was nothing left on the other end but static, and the occasional distant crackle of something electrical, dying slowly somewhere in the wreckage. "Grace," Bennett said gently, "you can close it." "I know," Grace said. She did not close it. I understood why. Closing that channel felt like agreeing that it was over, that there was nothing left to listen for, no small chance that a voice might come back through the static to tell us it had all been some terrible misunderstanding, that everyone had made it underground in time, that the tunnels had held after all. None of us wanted to be the one to end that hope, even though we all understood, somewhere in the quiet parts of our minds, that hope had already ended for us the moment the singing stopped. It was Sophie Hart who finally reached over and closed the channel herself, her expression unreadable, her movements careful and precise, the way a person moves when they are holding themselves together through sheer discipline alone. The bridge fell into a silence, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a full one. Every person present carrying something heavy and unspoken. None of us quite ready to be the first to break it. I want to explain something here, because I think it matters for understanding what came after. Humans, when we are frightened, tend to get loud. We shout, we argue, we fill space with noise, because noise feels like control, like doing something, even when there is nothing left to do. But there is another kind of human reaction, older and quieter, one that most people never see, because most people never live through the kind of moment that calls it forward. We go still, not frozen, not helpless, but still in the way a held breath is still, in the way the world seems to slow down and sharpen at the same time, every detail suddenly clear and cold and important. I felt it happen to me in that chair. I felt it happen to Grant and Hart standing near the back of the bridge, their postures shifting almost imperceptibly, weight settling differently, eyes losing whatever softness had been in them only an hour before. I felt it happen to Bennett most of all, watching her stand at the center of the bridge, her hands folded calmly behind her back, her voice, when it finally came, level and clear and utterly without warmth. "Daniel," she said, "I want a full record of everything that just happened. Every transmission, every timestamp, every word exchanged with Vorin, from the moment we identified those coordinates. I want it compiled and ready within the hour." "Yes, Captain," Daniel said, already moving. "Grace, prepare a formal channel to the Overcouncil." Not for negotiation, for notification. Notification of what? Grace asked quietly. Bennett turned to look at the view screen, where the trade station still hung against the stars, golden and enormous, and utterly untouched by what had just happened hundreds of light years away. "Of who they're actually speaking to," she said. I felt something settle in my chest at those words, something I could not fully name at the time, though I understood, even then, that we had crossed some invisible threshold, some line that could not be uncrossed no matter what happened next. Vorin's face appeared on the main screen not long after, and I watched him carefully, looking for whatever emotion existed behind those wide, pale eyes. He looked shaken, genuinely shaken, in a way that told me this outcome had not been part of his calculations, that somewhere in his long, comfortable, conflict-free existence, he had never truly believed that words like demonstration and exercise could end in something this permanent. "Captain Bennett," he said, and for the first time, His voice held none of the polished ease it had carried during our first meeting. I want to express, on behalf of the Over-Council, our deepest regret for what has occurred. This was never our intention. The strike commander responsible will face immediate review, and I don't want your review, Bennett said. I want the truth. Who authorized that strike, knowing there was any possibility, however small, that the coordinates might be occupied? Voren hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw something close to fear cross his features, though whether it was fear of us or fear of whoever waited behind him in that chamber, I could not say. The order came from Delegate Kale, he said finally. He wished to demonstrate our capabilities to your delegation. He believed the location was confirmed unoccupied. I do not believe he intended for anyone to be harmed. Intent, Bennett said, does not change what happened. No, Voren agreed quietly. It does not. Bennett was silent for a long moment, studying his face on the screen with an expression I had rarely seen on her before. Something between grief and resolve. The look of a person setting aside one version of themselves to make room for another, harder version that the moment demanded. I need you to understand something, she said finally, her voice quiet, but carrying easily across the silent bridge. You have spent this entire visit assuming you already knew what my species was. You looked at one small ship and one careful, polite delegation, and you decided that was the whole of us. I understand why. It's a natural mistake to make when you've never had reason to look deeper. Captain, I assure you, we intended no disrespect by— I'm not finished, Bennett said, and something in her tone made even Voren fall silent immediately. You are about to learn who we actually are, not through a demonstration, and not through anything staged for effect, through the truth. Our full history, unedited, unfiltered, exactly as it happened. I am releasing it to your Over-Council archives within the hour. Voren's eyes widened slightly. Captain, that is an unusual request. Most species share their histories gradually, over the course of many meetings, many years of— We don't have many years, Bennett said. We have 4,000 people who no longer have a home, and a Delegate Kale who apparently believed that killing them would make an impressive point. I think it's time your Over-Council understood exactly what kind of point we're actually capable of making, if we ever chose to make one. I sat there, watching that exchange, and I felt the shape of the story change around me, the way a familiar song shifts key without warning, still recognizable, but suddenly carrying an entirely different weight. We had come to this galaxy hoping to be understood as peaceful, careful, patient, and in the space of a single terrible hour, that hope had been buried alongside 600 people, who never should have had to pay for another species' careless demonstration of power. What came next was not born of anger alone. I want to be honest about that, because I think it would be easy to imagine what followed as some simple explosion of rage, and it was not that at all. It was colder than rage, quieter, the kind of resolve that settles into a person only after the shouting has already burned itself out, leaving behind something clear-eyed and absolutely certain of what needed to happen next. Bennett closed the channel to Voren without waiting for his reply, and turned to face the rest of us, her expression calm in a way that somehow felt far more unsettling than any anger could have been. Daniel, she said, pull our full historical archive, everything. I want it ready to transmit the moment I give the order. All of it, Captain? Daniel asked, his voice careful, including the parts we usually keep out of first contact protocols. Bennett looked at the view screen one more time, at the golden station still glowing peacefully against the stars, its inhabitants still unaware of exactly what they had just done, and exactly who they had done it to. Especially those parts, she said. It's time they understood who they invited into their meeting room. The transmission took 11 minutes to send in full, though its effects took considerably longer to settle over the station above us. I sat at my console watching the data stream out from the kinship's end, in a steady, unbroken pulse, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something capable of changing everything could look, on a screen, like nothing more than a slowly filling progress bar. Bennett had not sent it quietly either. She had requested, and received, a direct broadcast channel to the full Over-Council chamber, the same circular room where we had stood only a day earlier being politely underestimated by beings who had never known real hardship. This time, there would be no polite exchange of pleasantries first. This time, the truth would simply arrive, unannounced and unfiltered, and speak for itself. "They're receiving it now," Grace said quietly, watching her own display. "Translation systems are processing at maximum capacity across the station. I'm picking up chatter on multiple internal channels. They're struggling to keep up." I understood why. Human history is not a simple thing to summarize, and Bennett had not asked for a summary. She had sent everything. Centuries of records, unedited and complete. The long, slow climb of a species that had clawed its way up from small tribal conflicts into something capable of building cities, and then had turned those same instincts inward, again and again, until war became something we understood not as an occasional accident, but as a discipline, refined and studied and, eventually, mourned. I thought about my own history lessons growing up, sitting in a classroom on a quiet colony not so different from Haldis, learning about the centuries when humanity had nearly destroyed itself more than once, through conflicts so vast and so costly that entire generations grew up in their shadow. I thought about the treaties that followed each of those periods, imperfect and hard-fought, built by people who understood, in the marrow of their bones, exactly what the alternative looked like. I thought about the long, careful decades after that, when humanity finally turned its energy outward, toward the stars, disciplined by memory, restrained by choice rather than necessity. We had not stopped fighting because we had lost the capacity for it. We had stopped because we had finally understood, at a cost too enormous to ever forget, exactly what that capacity could do if left unchecked. That was the story now unfolding across 100 worlds worth of translation systems, and I watched, through the small window on my display that showed station-wide communication traffic, as the reaction began to spread. "Captain," Daniel said, his voice tight with something between awe and unease. "Internal over-council channels have gone almost completely silent. Whatever chatter was happening before, it's stopped. I'm reading what looks like an emergency session being called in the main chamber." "Good," Bennett said simply. Voron's face appeared on our screen not long after, and the change in him was immediate and unmistakable. Gone was the polished calm, the faint amusement that had colored our first meeting. In its place was something I can only describe as careful, deliberate composure, the kind a person adopts when they are working very hard not to let their true reaction show. "Captain Bennett," he said, "we have received your transmission. The Overcouncil is reviewing it now." "Take your time," Bennett said. "There's a lot to review." "Captain, I must ask," Voron said, and for the first time I heard something like genuine uncertainty in his voice. "Is this an accurate record? Unembellished? Some of our analysts believe there may be errors, given the scale of what is described." "It's accurate," Bennett said. "Every conflict, every treaty, every mistake we made and every lesson we drew from it. We don't hide our history, Voron. We simply don't lead with it. Because leading with it tends to frighten people before they've had the chance to see who we've chosen to become since." Voron was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, I could see movement in the chamber, delegates shifting in their seats, some leaning close to speak urgently with their neighbors, others sitting perfectly still, staring at displays we could not see. "Your species," Voron said slowly, "nearly destroyed itself. More than once, according to this record." "Yes," Bennett said. "And yet you chose to stop." "We chose to stop," Bennett agreed. "Not because we ran out of ways to hurt each other, because we finally understood what all of that hurting actually cost, and decided we wanted something better than survival built on scars." "You came here in peace," Voron said, and it was not quite a question. "We came here hoping for peace," Bennett said. "We still hope for it. That has not changed, Voron, even now. But I think it's important that your Overcouncil understands exactly what that hope actually represents. It is not weakness, it is not naivety. It is a choice, made deliberately, by a species that knows precisely what the alternative looks like, because we have lived through it ourselves, many times over, and buried far too many of our own people along the way." I watched Voron's face carefully as she spoke, and I saw the moment the full weight of her words finally landed. His eyes widened slightly, his posture shifted, some final layer of composure cracking just enough to let something raw show through underneath. "The strike on your colony," he said quietly. Delegate Kale believed he was demonstrating strength to a species too young and too small to understand real conflict. He wasn't demonstrating strength to a species too young to understand conflict, Bennett said. He was demonstrating carelessness to a species that has spent its entire history learning, at enormous cost, exactly what carelessness with power leads to. We understand conflict, Vorin. We understand it better than almost anyone in this galaxy, because we built our entire civilization on the wreckage of learning that lesson, over and over again, until we finally got it right. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I began to wonder if the channel itself had failed. Then Vorin spoke again, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "What do you intend to do now, Captain?" Bennett glanced toward me, just briefly, and I understood, in that small exchange, that the answer to that question had not yet been decided, not fully, and that whatever came next would depend on choices still being made in real time, by people who had just learned, in the space of a single transmission, exactly how much restraint had been holding the piece together until now. "That depends," Bennett said, turning back to the screen, "on what your Overcouncil decides to do about Delegate Kale, and about the people of Haldis Colony, who no longer have a home because of his choices. We are not looking for a war, Vorin. We never were. But we are done being underestimated, and we are done watching our people pay the price for someone else's careless demonstration." Across the station, in chambers full of beings who had never truly known hardship, who had built centuries of peace on distance from memory, rather than understanding earned through cost, the full weight of what humanity actually was, had finally begun to sink in. I could see it in the sudden stillness of every internal channel Grace monitored, in the careful, uncertain tone that had replaced Vorin's earlier confidence, in the slow, dawning realization spreading through 100 worlds that the small, polite delegation they had welcomed only a day before was not small at all. It had simply been patient. And patience, I was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as harmlessness. It never had been. The Overcouncil's emergency session lasted 11 hours. I know because I watched the clock the entire time, sitting at my station on a bridge that had grown quieter with each passing hour, every one of us waiting to learn what 100 worlds would decide to do about a single mistake that could not be undone. Bennett did not wait idly. She used those hours to prepare, and I want to be honest about what that preparation looked like, because I think it matters. It was not chaotic. It was not driven by anger. It was methodical, careful, the kind of preparation that comes from a species that has spent generations learning exactly how to plan for the worst possible outcome, while still hoping, quietly, that the worst possible outcome never actually arrives. "I want options," Bennett said, gathering the senior staff around the small briefing table just off the bridge. "Not just one plan, several, ranging from full restraint to full response, and everything reasonable in between." Daniel Ross laid out the technical picture first, his voice steady despite the exhaustion clearly written across his face. "The station itself is heavily defended, but their defenses are built around the assumption of ritual conflict. Slow, formal engagements between evenly matched forces who both intend to survive the exchange. Their systems aren't built to handle a single vessel operating with full commitment and no interest in matching their pace." "Meaning what exactly?" Grant asked. "Meaning we could do significant damage if it came to that," Daniel said. "Not because our ship is more powerful than anything they have, because our doctrine assumes conflict is something you finish quickly and decisively, to minimize suffering on both sides. Theirs assumes conflict is something you manage slowly, with plenty of room for negotiation along the way. Those are very different philosophies, and I don't think they understand yet how different." Bennett nodded slowly, absorbing that.
"I don't want a plan built around doing damage," she said.
"I want a plan built around making sure this never happens again. Those aren't always the same thing, but I want us thinking in that direction first." I found myself watching her carefully during that conversation, trying to understand the weight she was carrying. She was not a woman who wanted to prove anything. She was a woman trying to protect people, both the crew standing around that table and the colonists still grieving hundreds of light years away. And every decision she made in those hours seemed built around that single, unwavering priority. When the Overcouncil finally reconvened and requested our presence, Bennett brought only myself and Grace Turner with her, leaving Grant and Hart aboard the ship with clear instructions. I did not ask what those instructions were. I understood, without needing to be told, that Bennett was preparing for outcomes she hoped never to need. The chamber felt different this time. Gone was the golden, welcoming light that had greeted us during our first visit. In its place was something more subdued, almost solemn, as though the room itself understood that whatever happened here would matter far beyond the walls that contained it. Voren rose to address us, and I noticed immediately how different he looked from the confident delegate who had first mocked our single ship. He looked tired, careful, a being who had spent the last 11 hours confronting something he had never expected to confront. "Captain Bennett," he said, "the Overcouncil has reached a preliminary decision regarding Delegate Kale and the strike on Haldis Colony." "I'm listening," Bennett said. "Delegate Kale has been removed from his position, pending full review," Voren said. "The Overcouncil acknowledges responsibility for the error in identification that led to the strike, and offers its deepest condolences to the people of Haldis Colony and to humanity as a whole." Bennett let that settle for a moment before she answered. "Condolences are not enough, Voren. I appreciate that this is difficult for your people to hear, but I need you to understand exactly what we require before this can be resolved." She laid it out clearly, without raising her voice, without any of the theatrical weight the moment might have carried in a different kind of person. She asked for the return of every recoverable remain from Haldis Colony, so that families could properly lay their people to rest. She asked for a formal, public acknowledgement from the full Overcouncil, not a quiet internal decision buried in procedural language, but a clear statement that every member species would hear and understand. And she asked for a complete account of exactly how the decision to strike had been made, and by whom, so that nothing like it could ever happen again, through simple carelessness or misplaced pride.
"These are not unreasonable requests," she said.
"They are the minimum required for us to believe that this was truly a mistake, and not the beginning of a pattern we would need to prepare for." I watched the delegates exchange glances across the chamber, some clearly uncomfortable, others still struggling to fully process the history we had shared with them only hours before. It was Voren who finally spoke again, his voice careful. "Captain, these requests will require formal deliberation. Our processes for this kind of decision typically take considerable time, weeks, sometimes longer, to ensure fairness and full consensus among all member species." Something in Bennett's expression shifted then, subtle but unmistakable, the look of someone whose patience, already stretched thin over 11 long hours, had finally reached its limit. "Voren," she said quietly, 4,000 people no longer have a home. 600 of them are gone entirely, and their families are still waiting to learn if there is anything left of them to bring home and bury properly. I understand that your processes value patience and careful deliberation. I respect that, genuinely. But I need you to understand something in return." She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for every delegate in that chamber to lean in, waiting. "Humanity has already shown you patience," she said. "We showed it by choosing to come here quietly, in a single ship, hoping to build trust slowly, rather than announce ourselves with force. We showed it by sharing our full history with you, rather than letting you continue to underestimate us out of convenience. That patience is not infinite, and it is not owed to anyone by right. It is a choice we make, every single day, because we believe peace is worth choosing over the alternative. But choices can be unmade, Voren, if the people making them stop believing that choice is being respected in return." The chamber had gone completely silent, every delegate watching Bennett with an intensity that told me, more clearly than any translated word could have, that they finally understood exactly what kind of moment they were standing inside. "I am giving your Overcouncil until this time tomorrow," Bennett said. "Return what remains can be recovered. Issue a formal, public acknowledgement. Provide the account we've requested. If those conditions are met, I believe we can move forward from this, difficult as it has been, and build the kind of relationship both our peoples clearly need. If they are not met, I want you to understand, clearly and without any ambiguity, that we will not simply wait patiently for your processes to catch up with our expectations. We came here in peace. We are still offering peace, but we are done being treated as though our patience were the same thing as our limits." Voren studied her for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost every trace of its earlier condescension. I will convey your terms to the full Overcouncil immediately, he said. I hope sincerely that we can resolve this without further loss on either side. So do I, Bennett said. I would much rather this be the last difficult conversation we ever need to have than the first of many. We left the chamber not long after, walking back through corridors that no longer felt golden and welcoming, but simply quiet, heavy with the weight of a deadline now hanging over every species aboard that station. I did not know, as we walked, whether the Overcouncil would meet Bennett's terms in time. I only knew that whatever happened next would depend entirely on whether beings who had never truly known cost were finally ready to understand exactly what they were risking by continuing to underestimate the quiet, patient species that had just given them one final, honest chance to make things right. The deadline came and went in silence. I stood at my station as the final minute ticked away, watching the tactical display for any sign of movement from the station above us, any transmission from Vorin, any indication that the Overcouncil had reached a decision in time. Nothing came. Not a message. Not an acknowledgement. Not even an apology for the delay. Captain, Grace said quietly. Still no response on any channel. Bennett stood at the center of the bridge, watching the display with an expression I had come to recognize over the past 2 days. Calm on the surface, and utterly immovable underneath. Try one more time, she said. Give them the chance to explain themselves before we assume the worst. Grace tried. The channel connected, but no one answered on the other end. Only a long, empty silence that told us everything we needed to know, without a single word being spoken. It was Daniel who finally broke the quiet, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. I'm picking up internal Overcouncil traffic. It sounds like the delegates are still arguing. Some faction is pushing back against Delegate Kale's removal, arguing it sets a dangerous precedent for how future disputes get handled. They've stalled the entire process. They're debating procedure, Bennett said quietly, while 600 families wait to learn if there's anything left of their people to bury. I watched her stand there for a long moment, and I understood, without needing to be told, that whatever came next would not be born of anger. It would be born of the simple, quiet conclusion that words alone had reached the end of their usefulness. Ethan, she said, turning to me, I want you to understand something before we do this. We are not here to punish an entire species for the failure of a few individuals within it. We are here to make sure something like Haldus never happens again, to us, or to anyone else who ever meets this Overcouncil for the first time. Everything we do from this point forward needs to serve that purpose, and nothing else. Understood, Captain, I said. Target their capability to act, she continued, not their people. I want their defense grid disabled, their strike fleet grounded, their command network cut off from coordination. I want this station and everyone aboard it to understand, without any ambiguity, exactly what carelessness with power actually costs when the people on the other end of it finally decide to answer in kind. I felt something settle into place inside me as she spoke, the last uncertainty falling away, replaced by the clear, focused calm that comes only when a decision has finally, fully been made. I began working through targeting solutions, and I want to be honest about what that process felt like, because I think it matters more than anything else I could describe about that day. It did not feel like anger. It felt like grief, translated into precision. We moved through the station's defenses with a discipline that surprised even me, disabling weapons platforms before they could fully power up, severing communication relays between command centers, isolating strike vessels from the coordination systems that made them dangerous as a group, rather than merely capable as individuals. Every action was chosen carefully, aimed at capability rather than people, built around a doctrine humanity had spent centuries refining through the hardest lessons imaginable, the doctrine of ending a conflict as quickly and as completely as possible, precisely because we understood, better than almost anyone, how much unnecessary suffering came from conflicts allowed to drag on. Vorin's voice broke through on an open channel partway through, frantic in a way I had never heard from him before. Kinship's end. Stand down. I am authorized to negotiate immediately. Please, stand down and let us resolve this. We tried resolving this with words, Vorin, Bennett said, her voice steady, even as our systems continued their careful, methodical work across the station's defenses. Your Overcouncil chose silence instead. This is what silence costs. "You're one ship," Vorin said, and I heard, beneath the panic in his voice, the last remnants of disbelief, the final refusal to accept what was happening in front of him. One ship against an entire station, against fleets that have stood for centuries. "We know exactly what we are," Bennett said. "The question is whether your people finally understand what you invited into your meeting room 3 days ago." By the time it was over, less than an hour had passed. The station's primary defense grid sat dark and unresponsive. Their strike fleet, once so proud and untested, drifted disabled and harmless across the space around us, weapons offline, engines idling without direction. Communication between command centers had gone silent, not through destruction, but through careful, deliberate disconnection. Every system chosen specifically to demonstrate capability, without demanding a cost in lives that could never be returned. I want to be clear about something, because I think it is easy, looking back, to imagine that hour as something loud and chaotic. It was not. It was quiet, almost unbearably quiet. Every action on our end carried out with the same careful precision Bennett had asked for from the very beginning. A demonstration built not to destroy, but to make absolutely, permanently clear exactly what restraint had been protecting the Overcouncil from until that day. When it was finished, Bennett opened a final channel to the full Overcouncil chamber, her voice calm, almost gentle, in a way that somehow made the moment feel even heavier than if she had shouted. "This is what carelessness costs," she said, addressing every delegate watching through that channel. "Not because we wanted to prove anything to you, because you left us no other way to make sure you understood. Your defense grid will remain offline until formal terms are agreed and honored. Your fleet will remain grounded until Delegate Kale faces genuine accountability, and the people of Haldis Colony receive what they are owed. This is not the beginning of a war, Vorin. I need every one of you to understand that clearly. This is the end of a demonstration we very much hoped we would never have to give." The silence that followed stretched long and complete, filling every corner of that ancient golden station with something it had perhaps never truly known in all its centuries of careful, bloodless negotiation. Fear, earned honestly, and understood at last for exactly what it was worth. The Overcouncil met every term within 6 hours. I remember sitting on the bridge, watching the numbers come in one by one, remains recovered, and prepared for return to Haldis families. A formal public acknowledgement broadcast across every channel the Overcouncil controlled, and a full account of the decision that had led Delegate Kale to order a strike on what he assumed, carelessly and without proper verification, was empty ground. It was not enough to undo what had happened. Nothing could have been enough for that. But it was honest, and it was immediate, and after everything, that mattered more than I expected it to. Vorin requested a final meeting before we departed, and Bennett agreed, bringing the same small group that had stood with her from the beginning. The chamber, when we entered it one last time, felt different again, stripped of its earlier golden confidence, replaced by something quieter and more careful, the atmosphere of a room that had learned, at real cost, exactly how much it still had to understand about the wider galaxy it claimed to know so well. "Captain Bennett," Vorin said, rising to address us, "the Overcouncil wishes to formally apologize, not only for the strike on Haldis Colony, but for the manner in which your delegation was received from the moment you arrived. We underestimated you. We underestimated what patience from a species like yours actually represents. I do not think any of us fully understood, until now, what it means to build peace through discipline earned by cost, rather than simple distance from memory." "I appreciate that," Bennett said. "I want you to understand something in return, Vorin, because I think it matters for everything that comes after this. We did not come here hoping to be feared. We came here hoping to be understood. What happened over these past 3 days was never the outcome we wanted. It was the outcome your Delegate Kale's carelessness made necessary, and I hope, sincerely, that neither of our peoples ever needs to relearn that lesson again." Vorin nodded slowly. "I believe the wider galaxy will not need to relearn it either," he said. "Word of what happened here has already spread beyond this station. Every member species now understands, in ways they did not before, exactly what kind of history your people carry, and exactly what kind of restraint you have chosen to build from it." I thought about that as we made our final preparations to leave the station, the long golden corridors now feeling smaller somehow, less mysterious, simply a place we had passed through on our way to becoming something the rest of the galaxy would never again mistake for small or harmless. Grace found me near the observation window as we waited for departure clearance, both of us looking out at the vast, quiet expanse of stars beyond the station's hull. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. "Really over, I mean. Not just quiet for now." I thought about the question carefully before I answered, turning it over the way Bennett had taught all of us to turn over difficult things before speaking them aloud. "I think it's the beginning of something different," I said finally. "Not a war. Not the peace we hoped for either. Not exactly. Not yet. Something in between. A galaxy that finally understands where the line is, and a species that never wanted to draw it in the first place, but wasn't willing to let it be crossed without consequence." "Do you think other species will be afraid of us now?" she asked. "Maybe some of them," I admitted, "but I think most of them will simply be careful, respectful, in a way they weren't before. And honestly, I think that's probably healthier than the alternative we started with, where they assumed a quiet ship meant a harmless one." We departed the station not long after, the kinship's end sliding back into the open dark beyond the trade hub's lights, carrying with us a story that would spread far faster and far wider than we ever could ourselves. The transmission of Haldus Colony's final moments, and the transmission of everything that followed it, traveled together across 1,000 worlds, paired forever, in the memory of a galaxy that had never before had reason to imagine what a truly patient species might be capable of, once that patience finally reached its limit. I think about Haldus often, even now. I think about the young voice on that final channel, steady and frightened, and trying so hard to do right by the people counting on him. I think about the singing that stopped too soon, and the 600 people who never got the chance to see what came after. The acknowledgement, the accountability, the quiet, careful peace that followed in the wake of everything they lost. I do not think of what happened aboard that station as a victory. I do not think Bennett ever saw it that way either. Not once. Not even in the quiet hours afterward when the rest of us finally allowed ourselves to feel the full weight of everything we had done. I think she saw it the way I eventually came to see it myself, as a lesson taught at enormous cost, one we hoped, with everything we had, would never need teaching again. Humanity did not arrive in this galaxy looking to be its nightmare. We arrived hoping, quietly and sincerely, to be its neighbor. But somewhere in the space between a careless demonstration and an honest reckoning, the wider galaxy learned something about us that no amount of polite conversation could ever have taught them on its own. We remember every war we ever fought against ourselves, every cost, every lesson, every reason we finally chose peace over the alternative. And when that memory is threatened, when the peace we have built so carefully is tested by carelessness or cruelty, we do not forget how to answer. We simply hope, every single time, that we are never asked to. I still serve aboard the kinship's end. We still travel quietly, carefully, offering the same patient hand we extended on the day we first arrived. Most species we meet now approach us differently than the Overcouncil once did, with a respect earned not through fear alone, but through understanding. The same understanding Bennett offered so freely, and so honestly, when words alone might have been enough, if only they had been trusted a little sooner. The galaxy learned what humanity truly was on the day our darkest history finally answered for someone else's careless mistake. I hope, more than almost anything else I carry with me, that it is a lesson the galaxy never needs to learn twice.